Alright, let's start coding our Marvel-style logo in Blender. I'll walk you through each line of code, so you can understand exactly what's happening and why. First things first, let's import our necessary modules. We'll need BPY for Blender's Python API and Mesh for mesh operations. Next, we're setting up a variable for text extrusion. This txt_ext variable controls how much our text will pop out in 3D space. I'm setting it to 0.2, but feel free to experiment with different values to see the changes. Now, let's define the text for our logo. I'm using LeetOne for the left part of our logo and Studios for the right. These are stored in strLabelLeft and strLabelRight variables. You can replace these with any text you like. Let's dive into our first function, add_text. This function is crucial as it creates our text object in Blender. We start by creating a font curve, setting the text body, and then creating a font object from this curve. Notice how we set the character spacing, alignment, and extrusion depth of the text. These properties are essential for achieving the desired look of our text in the 3D space. Once our text properties are set, we link this text object to our Blender collection. This makes sure our text appears in the scene. Next up is the demesh function. We need this function to convert our text object into a mesh. This conversion is vital for applying later transformations and Boolean operations on the text. We also have a couple of utility functions, deleteIfExists and select_name. The deleteIfExists function checks if an object exists in our scene and deletes it if it does. This is particularly useful for keeping our scene clean as we develop our logo. The select_name function allows us to select an object in our scene by its name. This function is handy when we need to perform operations on specific objects. And that's the foundation of our script. We've set up our initial variables, text objects, and essential functions. Now that we've set up our basic functions, it's time to prepare our Blender scene. We want to start with a clean slate, so our script runs smoothly and our logo looks neat. Let me show you how we do this. First, we need to make sure nothing is selected in our scene. It's like hitting a twice in the viewport, but through code. Next, we want to remove any existing meshes in our scene. We do this by looping through all the meshes in bpy.data.meshes and removing them. This ensures that no previous work interferes with our new logo. We'll also remove all existing materials and curves using a similar approach. Now, let's handle collections. If there's a collection named Logotype, we'll remove it. Collections are like folders in Blender that help organize our objects. By removing the Logotype collection, we ensure no remnants from previous attempts are left. Lastly, we need to delete specific objects if they already exist from a previous run of the script. This is a neat way to reset our scene specifically for the objects our script will create. We're creating a new collection for our logo. This is like creating a new folder to keep all our logo elements together. We'll call this collection Logotype. Organizing objects into collections is a good practice for keeping our scene tidy and manageable. Next, we link this new collection to our scene's main collection. This step is essential to ensure that our logo's components are part of the main Blender scene and visible in our workspace. Once our collection is set up, we make it the active layer collection. This means that any new objects we create will automatically be part of this collection. Now, let's create our first text object. We're calling our add_text function with the strLabelLeft variable, which contains our text, and the txt_ext variable for extrusion. We're adding this text to our Logotype collection. Next, we're adding a cube that surrounds our text. This cube will play a role in the Boolean operations later. We add a primitive cube, adjust its dimensions to cover our text, and position it accordingly. Once our cube is in place, we apply the scale and location transformations. These steps are crucial for the cube to interact correctly with other objects in our scene. Let's run this part of the script and see what happens in the 3D viewport. There you go. We've successfully created a collection, added our text, and surrounded it with a cube. You can see our text object, LeetOne, appearing in the scene. We have our text and the surrounding cube in place. Now, let's make things interesting by carving out the text from the cube. This is where Boolean operations come into play, which are super powerful in Blender. We'll start by adding a Boolean modifier to our cube. This modifier allows us to use our text object to subtract from the cube, creating an impression of the text. I'm naming this modifier Boolean for easy reference. We set our text object as the target for the Boolean operation and choose difference as the operation type. This means the text volume will be subtracted from the cube. Let's apply this modifier to make the change permanent. When I run this script, you'll see the text getting subtracted from the cube in the 3D viewport. Next, we want our object to have a smooth appearance. For this, we use Blender's shade_smooth operation. This smooths out the appearance of the mesh, making it look more polished and professional. We also enable auto smooth on normals. This helps in controlling which edges appear soft and which appear hard in our rendered object. It's a neat trick to enhance the visual quality of our logo. Lastly, we're going to hide our original text object as we no longer need it to be visible. It has served its purpose in the Boolean operation, and now we can focus on the resulting mesh. And there you have it. We've successfully used a Boolean operation to create a cool cutout effect in our cube, smooth the appearance, and hid the original text object. This technique is a cornerstone in creating intricate 3D logos in Blender. Moving forward with our logo design, we're now going to add some intricate detailing to our object. This involves selecting certain faces of our mesh, creating insets, and then separating these insets to form new objects. First, we need to switch our cube to edit mode. In edit mode, we can manipulate individual vertices, edges, and faces of the mesh. We'll specifically focus on the top faces of our cube. To identify the top faces, we'll loop through all the faces of the mesh and select those whose normal is pointing upwards. In Blender, a normal with a z value of 1.0 points directly up. With our top faces selected, we'll now perform an inset operation. Insetting is like creating a border inside a face, which is great for adding complexity and detail to our design. We're setting a thickness of 0.02 for our inset. Now, we need to separate the inset faces from the original object. This is done using the separate operation in Blender. What it does is create a new object from our selected faces. This technique is useful for creating distinct parts of a logo. After separation, we'll give meaningful names to our objects for better organization. The original object is named letterbox, and the newly created object from the separated faces is named letteredges. And there we have it. We've successfully added depth and intricacy to our object, which is essential for that dynamic 3D logo effect. In our next steps, we'll continue to refine our logo, adding materials and animations to bring it to life. Now that we've got our logo structure set up, it's time to bring it to life with some materials. Materials in Blender are what give our objects color, texture, and reflectivity. Let's see how we can create a more realistic and visually appealing logo with them. We'll start by creating a material for brushed metal. This material will give parts of our logo a realistic metal appearance. First, we check if a material named brushed metal already exists. If it doesn't, we create it and set its diffuse color to a grayish tone. This color mimics the look of real metal. Next, we create a chrome material. Chrome is known for its shiny and reflective qualities, perfect for giving our logo that sleek, modern look. We follow the same steps, checking if it exists and then creating it if necessary. For the interior parts of our lettering, we'll create a material named Letter Interior. This one will have a dark blue color, adding a nice contrast to our logo. Remember, the colors and materials you choose can significantly impact the overall aesthetic of your design. With our materials ready, it's time to assign them to our objects. We'll assign the chrome material to the letter edges object. This will make the edges of our lettering stand out with a shiny chrome finish. For the letterbox, we'll go with the brushed metal material we created earlier. This will give the main body of our logo that metallic texture, complementing the shiny edges nicely. And just like that, our logo is starting to come together with a professional look and feel. These materials are the first step in making our logo pop. In the next section, we'll dive deeper into refining our design, adding more details, In our next step, we'll focus on refining the interior parts of our letters in the logo. This involves a bit of precision in selecting specific faces and then separating them to create a unique effect. Let's get into the details. First, we'll ensure that no objects are selected in our scene. This is important to start our selection process from a clean state. Now, let's switch our letterbox object to edit mode. In edit mode, we can manipulate the individual faces, edges, and vertices of the mesh. We're particularly interested in the interior sides of our letters. We'll loop through all the faces of our letterbox mesh. Our goal here is to select the faces that make up the sides of the letters. We identify these faces based on their normal orientation. Essentially, we're looking for faces that aren't pointing straight up or down. With the correct faces selected, it's time to separate them from the main object. This separation creates a new object from our selected faces. In Blender, this is achieved with the separate operation. After the separation, we need to manage our objects. We store the names of originally selected objects for reference and then make our newly separated object active. This is an important step in keeping our scene organized. There we have it. We've successfully isolated and separated the interior faces of our letters, giving us more control over their appearance and materials. In our upcoming steps, we'll continue to enhance the visual aspects of our logo, adding more depth and complexity. As we continue to refine our logo, it's important to remember that in Blender, as in most creative software, there are often multiple ways to achieve a desired effect. The approach we're taking might not be the most optimal, but it's a great example of the flexibility Blender offers. Let's explore this further. First, we'll assign the letter interior material to the interior faces of our letters. This step is straightforward. If our object has existing material slots, we replace the first slot. If not, we append a new slot. This process is part of giving our logo its distinct look. Perhaps defining a function for material assignment is the best approach, but I leave that up to you. In this tutorial, we just keep adding code to our script. Now, let's focus on locating and working with specific faces of our mesh. In this part of the script, we're identifying the largest faces on the sides of our letters. While there might be more efficient methods to achieve this, our approach demonstrates how you can manually process and separate faces based on certain criteria, such as their area. We're using a loop to find the 4 largest faces. This is done by comparing the area of each face and selecting the ones with the largest areas. It's a bit of a manual process, but it's a good exercise in understanding mesh properties. After identifying these faces, we separate them from the original object. This separation is similar to what we did earlier, but targeted at specific faces. We're essentially breaking down our mesh into more manageable parts for further manipulation. Finally, we rename our newly created object to letterbox rect. This object now contains the largest faces we identified and separated. Renaming helps us keep track of different elements in our scene. Our logo is taking shape beautifully. Next, we're going to add a bit of flair by separating each letter and assigning unique colors to them. This will give our logo a dynamic and colorful appearance. Let's dive right into it. First, we need to select the letter's interior faces object. This object contains the faces we previously separated. We'll switch to edit mode and then back to object mode. This little trick is a workaround to refresh our object's data in Blender. Now, let's separate each letter into its own object. We use this separate operation with the Logotype. This operation breaks apart any disconnected parts of our mesh into individual objects. In our case, it'll separate each letter. Once separated, we'll assign unique colors to each letter. We've prepared an array of color values representing different shades. These colors will add visual interest to our logo. Let's loop through each newly created letter object. For each object, we'll create a unique material using one of our predefined colors. This process not only colors our letters, but also demonstrates how you can programmatically create and assign materials in Blender. With each iteration, we're naming our objects as letter interior underscore followed by a number, and then assigning the respective material. This systematic approach helps keep our scene organized and makes it easier to identify our objects. And just like that, each letter interior faces in our logo now has its own color and personality. This colorful approach brings out the playfulness and creativity that Blender allows. Remember, the way we approach this task is just one of many methods in Blender. It's all about experimenting and finding what works best for your project. With our colorful letters beautifully arranged, it's time to add the second part of our logo text. This step involves a different approach compared to our first text, adding variety to our logo design. Let's get started. We begin by ensuring we're in object mode. This mode allows us to add new objects to our scene. Now, let's create our second text object using the add_text function. This time, we're using strLabelWrite, which contains our second label, Studios. We set the extrusion depth to half of what we used for the first text to give it a slightly different look. We need to position this new text object to the right of our first label. To achieve this, we calculate its position based on its dimensions and add a small offset. This helps in creating a cohesive yet distinct arrangement of the text parts in our logo. After positioning, we apply the location transformation to our object. This step is crucial for the changes to take effect in the 3D space. Next, we apply smooth shading and enable auto smooth on normals. These steps ensure our text has a smooth and refined appearance, essential for a professional-looking logo. To further refine the text, we add a remesh modifier. This modifier recalculates the mesh topology, giving it a cleaner, more uniform structure. We set the octree depth to 8 for a high level of detail. Finally, we convert our text object to a mesh, just like we did with the first one. This allows for more advanced editing and manipulation if needed. And there you have it. Our second text label is now perfectly positioned and styled, complementing the first part of our logo. This process highlights the versatility in Blender's text handling and the power of modifiers. In our final steps, we'll put everything together and see our complete logo come to life. Let's continue enhancing our logo by adding some intricate details to the right label. We're going to give it an inset effect, which adds depth and complexity to the design. This technique is similar to what we did earlier, but applied to our second text object. Let's dive in. We start by switching our right label object to edit mode. In edit mode, we can manipulate individual faces of our text mesh. Our goal here is to work on the top faces of the letters. We loop through each face in our mesh and select those that are mostly facing upwards. We determine this by checking if the normal C value is greater than 0.75. This helps us identify the top faces of each letter. Next up, we perform an inset operation on these selected faces. This creates a border-like effect inside each face, giving our text a more three-dimensional look. We set a small thickness for the inset to keep it subtle yet effective. Now, we'll separate these inset faces from the main object, just like we did before. This separation creates new objects from our selected faces, allowing us to manipulate them independently if needed. After separating, we manage our objects in the scene. We store the names of the originally selected objects and make our newly created object the active one. We'll name this new object Right Letters Edges. Naming objects systematically helps keep our workflow organized. And with that, our right label now has added depth and a more dynamic appearance. These small details can significantly enhance the overall impact of a 3D logo. Remember, Blender offers a myriad of ways to add such effects, and experimenting with different techniques is key to mastering 3D design. We're now moving towards adding some final touches to our logo. In this part, we're going to add extrusions to the edges of both labels, enhancing their 3D effect. Then, we'll assign specific materials to these edges to make them stand out. We loop through the faces of the mesh and select those facing upwards. We're particularly interested in the top edges of our letters as we want to give them an extruded look. Now, let's extrude these selected faces slightly upwards. Extrusion is a fantastic way to add depth and a more pronounced 3D effect to specific parts of a mesh. Next, we'll do the same for our left label. We make the letter edges object active, go into edit mode, select the top faces, and extrude them. It's a repetitive process but crucial for maintaining consistency in our design. With our extrusions complete, it's time to give these edges a distinct material. For the right label's edges, we'll assign the chrome material. This will give it a shiny, metallic finish, adding to the logo's overall allure. For the left label, we choose the brushed metal material for its edges. This contrast between the two materials will create a visually striking effect, enhancing the logo's appeal. And just like that, our logo's labels now have beautifully extruded edges with eye-catching materials. These final details play a significant role in bringing our logo to life, showcasing the depth and sophistication that Blender can achieve. As we approach the final stages of our logo creation, we'll add some stylish decorative elements and bring our scene to life with animation. Let's add a top and bottom bar and a mirror-like background plate to enhance our logo's aesthetic. And finally, we'll animate our objects for that extra flair. Let's create a top bar that sits above our right label. We add a cube, adjust its dimensions to span across the label, and name it Bar Top. This bar will add a modern, sleek look to our design. Similarly, we create a bottom bar named Bar Bottom. We position it below our right label, mirroring the top bar. These bars frame our text nicely, giving it a more finished and polished look. Now, for the background, we'll add a thin, mirror-like plate. This plate will sit behind our entire logo, reflecting elements of the scene and adding depth. We carefully adjust its dimensions and position to ensure it perfectly frames our logo. With our decorative elements in place, let's add some animation. We'll create a simple function named animate_object to animate the position of our objects. This function will move our objects from an initial location to an end location, creating a smooth transition effect. Let's animate our right label and right letters edges objects. We'll have them move into position, starting off-screen for a dramatic entrance. This animation adds dynamic movement to our logo, making it more engaging and eye-catching. Let's animate our right label and right letters edges objects. We'll have them move into position, starting off-screen for a dramatic entrance. This animation adds dynamic movement to our logo, making it more engaging and eye-catching. Lastly, we set the end frame for our scene's animation. This defines the length of our animation sequence. And there you have it. Our logo now boasts elegant decorative bars, a reflective background, and smooth animation, bringing it to a whole new level of sophistication. These final touches showcase the incredible versatility of Blender in creating professional and dynamic 3D designs. As we come to the final stretch of our tutorial, let's add the finishing touches to our logo by creating special materials. We'll craft a reflective mirror material and an emissive material that glows. By the end of this section, I encourage you to experiment with applying these materials to specific faces of the top and bottom bars, enhancing the overall look of your logo. Let's begin by creating a mirror material. This material will reflect the environment, adding depth and realism to our scene. We create a new material and use nodes to adjust its properties. By setting the metallic value to 1 and roughness to 0, we achieve a highly reflective mirror effect. We assign this mirror material to our mirror background object. This step will transform our background plate into a reflective surface, adding an elegant touch to our logo. Next, we create an emissive material. This type of material emits light, almost like it's glowing. It's perfect for adding vibrant highlights or futuristic effects to your designs. We use an emission node in our material setup, where we can define the color and strength of the glow. Here, I'm choosing a red color, but feel free to experiment with different hues. And with that, our materials are ready. Now, here's a challenge for you. Try applying the emissive material to specific faces on the top and bottom bars of your logo. For example, you could apply it to faces pointing downward on the top bar and to those pointing upward on the bottom bar. This will create a stunning effect as if the bars are illuminated from within. This exercise is an opportunity for you to practice selecting faces based on their orientation and applying materials to them. It's a valuable skill in Blender and a great way to put your own creative spin on this project. I hope this tutorial has been informative and inspiring. Remember, the key to mastering Blender is experimentation and practice. Don't be afraid to try new things and push the boundaries of your creativity. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please like, share, and subscribe for more Blender content. Keep blending, and I can't wait to see what amazing designs you come up with.